Hi, everyone. Welcome. I know folks are going to be trickling in the next couple minutes, but really delighted to have you here with us today. My name is Claudia Aiken. I'm Director of New Research Partnerships here at the Housing Solutions Lab. In today's webinar, we are going to be talking about ways that local housing and climate organizations can collaborate to tackle both housing and climate priorities. I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague, Satvik Amravati, who's a policy fellow here at the lab. He will be helping to tee up your questions during the Q&A portion today, and we're also just so excited to welcome Alane Humrich and Katherine Greenshaw. Alane is program director, and Katie is an energy tune-up technician at the Community Weatherization Coalition in Alachua County, Florida. Their work was featured in the lab's recent report about collaborative housing climate initiatives. So we're just so glad to have them. And a quick note before we jump in that today's webinar is being recorded and we'll post it to the lab's YouTube channel when that's ready, along with a link to the slide deck. So don't worry about trying to copy down things that you see here. All right. I will start things off now with a very brief introduction to the Housing Solutions Lab. I will then highlight some key findings from that recent report from the lab. And then we will move into a conversation with Alane and Katie to learn more about the coalition's initiatives and hear about their experience navigating this intersection of housing and climate work. And finally, we will have 10 to 15 minutes for your questions, so please feel free to submit those via the Q&A function at any time during the session, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. So very quickly, if you're not familiar with the Housing Solutions Lab, we are based at the NYU Furman Center, and our mission is to help especially small and mid-sized cities plan, launch, and evaluate housing policies with the goal of advancing racial equity, health, and well-being. At the lab, we recognize that housing intersects with so many other dimensions of public policy, including education, transportation, public health, and of course, climate policy. We really dug into how housing and climate policy intersect in a first report that we published back in 2024. I will drop a link to that in the chat shortly. Here we go. If you'd like to check it out. That report really laid out the ways in which housing policy already acts as climate policy in many cases, and also made a case for why cities need to think proactively about those two sectors in tandem. But our ongoing direct work with cities at the lab has suggested that these two sectors often carry out their work in silos. And this really means that housing and climate agencies could be missing opportunities to leverage each other's knowledge, resources, policy levers, and infrastructure to achieve communities that are safe and livable and sustainable. And this has really only become more important in the last year as climate efforts have seen this dramatic loss of federal funding. More than ever, preventing and mitigating climate change is going to rely on whether we can be smart about existing tools that fall into the realm of housing policy, such as land use, permitting, home repair, and so on. Next slide. So all this led us to embark on an effort to try to identify promising cross-sector initiatives. Again, building on our previous report, we were really looking for initiatives in three big buckets: programs that are meant to ensure long-term sustainability, programs to protect the physical safety of residents facing climate risk, and programs to ensure equitable disaster response. Our goal was to better understand what these initiatives look like, how they were structured, how are they funded, what led to their creation, what challenges have they faced, in order to inform the work of other localities that are seeking to overcome these silos. We ultimately cataloged 54 local programs at this housing climate intersection, ranging from municipal climate plans that really actively think about housing, to home repair programs that intentionally incorporate energy efficiency and climate safety. And to dig even deeper, we conducted a set of 17 interviews with program leaders who came from housing authorities, community development departments, nonprofits, city sustainability offices, and more. Next slide. Our scan was far from exhaustive. There are no doubt many promising collaborations out there that we missed, but we did turn up some patterns. For example, we found that the most common approach we were seeing was to improve how residential units operate. For example, through energy audits, repairs, retrofits. And this makes some sense given the aging housing stock in our nation, the fact that most people do live in existing buildings. So focusing just on new construction isn't going to solve a bulk of our climate challenges. So home repair is a growing priority, both from a housing quality and a climate point of view. And rehab and retrofit programs can also lead to utility bill savings for households, offering very tangible benefits that can transcend some of the political rhetoric surrounding climate change. The least common approach we saw was actually changing the location of housing. So location-based initiatives try to address climate concerns by changing where people live, either relocating current households or trying to focus new development in specific areas within a community. These approaches are challenging. On the one hand, you can imagine that relocating households away from climate risky areas can be politically fraught, it can be resource intensive. And then on the other hand, while increasing housing density, especially near transit, is a common talking point among green housing advocates, those efforts also often face strong resistance from community members. Next slide. We dug into how these collaborative efforts are structured, and we found four basic types. In the first, one organization essentially acts as the convener to coordinate across multiple agencies and groups, which works well for really complex and time-sensitive projects. So an example here was the Philadelphia Energy Authority's Built to Last program. In the second model, an organization builds expertise in a given area and then builds local partnerships to kind of expand that reach. That's something we often saw with nonprofits. We also saw a mediator structure where an agency with that deeper technical expertise works to coordinate communication between different stakeholders and also with residents. And an example here was Sustain Dane's Efficiency Navigator program. And finally, we saw a model whereby multiple agencies with different programs, distinct initiatives, come together to try to create a one-stop shop or seamless experience for users. And an example there is Denver's Office of Climate Action. We also looked into funding models. Many programs we saw did rely on federal funds. And the challenge here, of course, is the uncertainty that that comes with. But there's also challenges related to trying to braid together different funding streams that come from housing and energy and environmental agencies that can be challenging given the different grant requirements. In some cases, we saw local utilities actually fund energy efficiency and renewable retrofits or other programs, sometimes because of state mandates. And then a local nonprofit would often become the specialist in helping households access and use those funds. We saw in some cities voters approve the expansion of sales taxes to fund climate and housing action. That approach could be really powerful for funding larger projects, but also politically difficult to achieve and really dependent on kind of economic conditions. And finally, we saw some places that stood up green banks, which were able to really specialize in climate financing, but were also rarely the sole source of capital for projects. Two areas where we saw some challenges for housing climate collaborations were data sharing and equitable engagement. We just didn't see a lot of housing and climate agencies working together to try to align their metrics for success or share data to inform their joint work. Programs in our scan also often failed to center resident engagement, possibly because it can seem difficult to combine really technical knowledge with community input, although there were some powerful exceptions in our scan too, and we're going to talk more about that in a bit. One of the things we took away from this work is that if places want to develop a collaborative approach, there are a few promising ways to get started. One is building on existing home repair or retrofit programs to try to coordinate divergent efforts that may be focused on energy efficiency on the one hand, or housing quality on the other, or protection against natural disasters. And this is what we saw Philadelphia really do. Another is establishing a coordinated community resource center post-disaster. That's something we see with Boulder County's Rebuilding Better program. They really came together after the Marshall Fire, and it laid the groundwork uh, for a coalition that could deal with things down the road as well. And finally, focusing on local flexible financing initiatives is really promising. So an example here is Portland's Clean Energy Benefits Fund. They were able to create this dedicated local revenue stream for their housing climate action. And as cities embark on these efforts, we also have a few recommendations. First is to maintain a focus on affordability rather than on climate change writ large. Affordability often feels more tangible and less politically charged. At the same time, it can be really powerful to harness climate events like wildfires and floods to build that local coalition that can eventually think about longer term goals like reducing greenhouse gas emissions and also use longer term tools like zoning. We think a data-driven approach to define shared goals and articulate program benefits is helpful to build that narrative that can then cross silos. And finally, we recommend thinking hard about engagement, as the federal cuts to climate-related programs have created greater need at the local level. Effective communication and collaboration with communities is even more crucial. Engagement not only improves program design, but it also ensures that beneficiaries truly feel the impact of new initiatives on their lives. All right, so there is so much more in the report that I just won't have time to talk about, not to mention a link to that full scan of 54 programs. I hope you will check it out. You can scan this QR code or simply follow the link that I'm going to drop into the chat. But with that, I'm going to turn to our fireside chat with Alane and Katie, and keep those questions in the Q&A coming. Um, like I said, we will get to as many of them as we can in a short while. All right, wonderful. Thank you both so much again for being here and for being willing to share about your work. I'm going to start with you, Alane. If you could just give us a little background about the Community Weatherization Coalition, the work you do in Alachua County, and would love to know just how the coalition got started and how it's evolved.
Sure. Thank you so much for having us. The CWC started almost 20 years ago now. The conversation started, a group came together of local churches. It was called the Action Network at the time. It is no longer existence, but it's because our neighbors and community members were coming to their churches to help pay their utility bills, which was an issue then and still an issue now. So a group of volunteers decided that it would be a great idea to help reduce those utility bill and manage that so those resources could be spread out to help more people. Um, and in the beginning, our local utility, GRU, Gainesville Regional Utilities, and other nonprofits, Rebuilding Together North Central Florida, were all involved. And we developed our program and started training volunteers in 2008 to perform home energy audits that we then transitioned to calling home energy tune-ups in about 2016, 2018.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to turn to you, Katie. Could you share the story specifically of the Alachua County Energy Efficiency Program? I'd love to know a little bit about the motivation for it, and how you brought together all the different partners to try to tackle the joint housing and climate challenges. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Okay, how about now?
Perfect.
All right, great. So the city of Gainesville had a rental ordinance program that I think the county was trying to kind of see how that went about and emulate it if it went well. And it was for a time. The Alachua County Labor Coalition is a local spearheader of just renters' rights, of course. Um, and so in March of 2022, the Board of County Commissioners moved to create an energy efficiency pilot program for rental properties. And we wanted to focus, of course, on affordability concerns around rent and as well as energy burdens. And they budgeted about $3 million of our received funding from the American Rescue Plan Act funding to go toward that. Around 300 to 400,000 of that was going to go to the pilot program. Um, the codes administration was going to be in charge of the permitting process in order for owners of rental properties to have a rental permit with certain standards that needed to be achieved in order to alleviate those energy burdens for tenants. And if they had issues with either paying for those upgrades or um, anything like that, that was when we would come in and help get those upgrades completed at no cost to the owners as long as they kept rent affordable for a period of time. So it was kind of a carrot stick situation there. Um, and it was approved, and we started hiring, and then the state preempted our program.
Oh,
Not our
wow.
program, but the um, having rental regulations at a county level or city level. So the only regulations were allowed to be at state level. And so we lost the stick and we were just a carrot. Um, but yeah, that was kind of how we began. We had a very passionate commissioner who was really knowledgeable about all of the different community resources that Alachua County has to offer. And let's see, we are Community Weatherization Coalition is a DBA of Rebuilding Together, North Central Florida, who does critical home repair. So they have good relationships with different contractors around who are willing to do great work with a different pay structure than typical. And the Community Weatherization Coalition, we do our energy tune-ups, like Alane was saying. So we kind of do the intake, and rebuilding does the upgrades. And then one of our previous board members is Anna Sampson, who is with We Are Neutral. After somebody goes through all the upgrades, they come in and evaluate the changes of carbon emissions that have occurred by participating in our program.
That's amazing. Okay, so definitely some different partners working together there.
Yeah,
Um, have there been any challenges to building up that partnership that supports the program?
I I don't think so. With our ends of the partners, I think a lot of us have been affiliated with the others in different ways, either being friends outside of work or on boards or volunteering together. Um, I think the biggest boon was just keeping each other kind of in mind when you have a project in your head that you're like, let's see if that person would be willing to, you know, come into the project. And then just being willing to work together.
And I'm going to ask another follow-up question that was not part of our prepared conversation,
Okay.
but I think, it is really important that now you don't have the stick, you only have the carrot. And
Yes.
yeah, would just love your thoughts on how that has changed the program.
Um, well, we were kind of not expecting to have to do a lot of marketing. And CWC is kind of more of a grassroots program. We have people, as soon as they hear about us, like they want a tune-up. But there's so many different reasons that a property owner as a landlord might want or not want to participate. Um, whether that's not wanting to abide by an affordability commitment or them just being kind of hands off in general, which is unfortunately far too common. Um, yeah, it's, yeah, we weren't really expecting to do a lot of marketing. And
Yeah,
trying
that
to
makes
adjust our
sense.
language for that has definitely been difficult. But it's a learning process and we're trying our best.
Have you seen any examples? I hope not, but where a landlord will get the assistance and then will essentially not pass the savings on to residents or even raise rents?
Not yet.
Okay.
We did have some technical assistance grant from the ACEEE, um, American Council for, I forgot the last
It's a
three.
lot of ease. Yeah.
It's a lot of E's. um, Energy efficient economies. Correct me if I'm wrong. Did I do that? Okay.
That sounds
Um,
right.
and so with them, we did some renter and landlord surveys. And something that we kind of learned from the landlords is that they wanted safety nets in place, of course. Florida has a big problem with drastically rising insurance and property tax rates. So they wanted to not be in the red, and I don't blame them. So we do have a couple safety nets in place. Well, one safety net in place for them where if they need to raise their rent in order to be up to market value, they are able to do that, but they must submit a couple of comps. Another thing was that we had some feedback from landlords who they're not in it for making money. They had rent way below market. They're just helping out a friend or somebody that they've cared about. And say our rent typical in the area is $1,500. They might be charging $500. And they're like, well, if this person, moves on, I want to be able to fix that. So that, would help in that sort of situation. Um, but as far as to go back to your question, kind of as far as um, just not following the program whatsoever, we have not had that happen yet. And if that did happen, we do require them to pay back the entire um, amount that we have
Hmm.
committed to them from the county, plus a 10% administrative fee, and there is no proration.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, Elaine, kind of switching topics a little bit. I know in some past conversations, we've also talked a bit about the Empower Coalition, which CWC has been involved in, and would love to hear a bit more about that effort too.
Sure, this is the really cool project that's been in the works and for years now. It's a partnership between our county, our local county NAACP Environmental Justice Committee, our city, local government, Santa Fe College, our school board and neighborhood associations, and the private sector. So we were selected as one of only 30 U.S. communities for a technical assistance grant through the U.S. Department of Energy years back. And we are working in three targeted neighborhoods that were identified as high utility burdens and neighborhoods in need. Um, And then the cool part about it is there's this innovative institutional solar program. So it's coming at it from the equity lens, and it's not individual solar on homes, but they've been working for years. And some of our board members, and there's some really key people involved in writing grants and trying to get solar on a local building, a local government building. And we have a private donor foundation that is contributed to seed that first money, as well as seed some money to help community engagement events. And so the idea is solar on a local community building, and the incentives and rebates generated from that building will go into a community investment fund where it will help improve and repair homes and weatherize homes. So it's been really awesome to be a part of. The last 3 years, we've had several community engagement events in different neighborhoods, and now an advisory board is coming together and getting more formalized. So they've been working through an application and getting select clients from their neighborhoods to receive energy efficiency upgrades. So I've been involved from the part of helping provide data. We've done tune-ups for over 2,000 homes in our county since we started. So we've mapped out homes in recent years from these 3 targeted neighborhoods and have selected those with high energy burdens and lower income neighbors. And then I bring them to the table, and the community gets to decide who we can help and how. And of course, I make the recommendations about which appliances would be the most impactful to replace. And it is seeded currently because of some changes in the federal government and funding sources that we were hopeful for that have not come to be. We are lucky to have that private foundation is also seeding this money to help with these first few rounds of home energy upgrades. So that has made it possible for the community to see their selections and choices to help these neighbors, come to be and get to see pictures before and after. And it's been amazing for community engagement and trust building in these neighborhoods.
Yeah, I was so excited to hear about that program. Partly because, like I said earlier, we just don't see that many examples of really truly community engaged collaborations at the intersection of housing and climate. So it was great to see, and it does kind of link renewables with home repair in a way I hadn't seen before either. I have seen some increasingly creative initiatives. For example, one in Detroit comes to mind, where communities kind of like compete to have solar arrays and so win funding for home repairs for their neighborhood.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, a very, very cool project. Another question I have, kind of more broadly, how does CWC talk about your programs and their impacts? Are there ways that you try to frame your work to really speak to both housing and climate-focused constituencies, or just the broadest constituency possible?
It depends on the stakeholder and who we're working with. We are part of the county and city's climate action plans. So I'd say in general, our first part of our mission is to help our neighbors. So we're often coming at it from reducing the utility burdens of the community members most in need. Our work, we're hands-on, putting things in homes directly, lighting, shower heads, pipe insulation, while we're doing tune-ups that directly reduce utility bills and reduce energy burdens and reduce carbon emissions too. So we don't often market it that way, but we did have a part of a grant, American Public Power Association deed grant years back, that we had the opportunity to have a rigorous analysis of our work through University of Florida, and found that we save on average of 1,657 kilowatt hours of energy per household, over 6,200 gallons of water per household and an average savings of $200 to $300 per household per year.
Wow.
And about 10, so that's about a 10% energy equivalent energy savings, gas and electric. Um, so the cumulative impact of our work is, there's different ways we communicate it depending on who we're presenting to and what the opportunity is, but it is saving, I think it's equivalent of taking 250 cars off the road a year these days because we've done over 2,000. So,
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Well, I do see one question in the chat, which is kind of related, I think, to what you've been saying, but maybe this might be one for you, Katie. I'm not sure. The question from Robert is, what was your strategy to build acceptance from the local real estate community? I wonder if you could speak to that.
Did you want to say anything about like the CWC and that, and I can go on to AC, Elaine?
sorry, what was
Oh,
can you,
what was your
Yeah,
strategy to build acceptance from the local real estate community?
exactly.
Or
oh,
is that too
I
many
think that's a
questions?
very AC question. Yeah.
Okay, okay. I didn't
Um,
know if like previously if we'd have like at CWC done any of that.
yeah, I think that's a targeted question for AC probably. Yeah.
Okay. Um, Let me think. So I kind of have grouped um landlord property owners into three separate categories. One is um, MIA. They are based in like Miami or California or something like that, and their name on the deed is some shell company or something like that. And then there's folks like that, but still use like they still touch base with the tenants or they have their actual name as the owner.
Right.
And then there's a huge gap between that and then just like mom and pop people. So one of our newest landlords in the program, like it's the house he and his wife like literally got married in the backyard. Like they have an emotional investment there. Um, but for the real estate groups that we've kind of done some lunch and learns at some of their facilities that helped kind of get a foot in the door. And then also um, emphasizing the monetary gains as opposed sometimes to the human gains. So things like this increases your property value. So when it's time to sell, like you're a little ahead of the game or things like that. In addition, a secondary um, um, monetary thing would be just like tenant retention. It costs
Hmm.
money to flip between tenants and being able to just keep somebody in the house, like that does benefit everyone involved, even if it benefits the owner for a different reason than it benefits the tenants.
Yep.
Um, so just kind of reframing everything to be a little more economic based. Um, yeah. I mean, for the real estate groups in particular, the mom and pops, I feel like have been very easy to just get excited about the program.
Totally. Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, and interesting because I know we often talk about this kind of like incentive split that happens with rental properties, where, if tenants are paying for the utilities, the landlord might not feel the pressure to try to save on energy. Yeah, really interesting. We have another question here from Sylvia who wants to know, um, kind of about the learning curve for CWC. Was it steep for you and your team members to get the training to measure and monitor the energy burden, for example?
Hmm. Well, we're not monitoring. someone else analyzed our service. We're just doing what we do.
Got it.
So, I mean, we had energy auditors involved from the beginning, helping develop our inspection form and processes. And we have volunteers trained twice a year in a three-part 12-hour training by energy experts and retired engineers and things like that. So we're doing really first step weatherization. And then as far as like monitoring, we do have a public utility, so we can pull utility data and see some initial like pre and post impacts. But that analysis, we don't internally do that like on an ongoing basis, if that answered the question.
Yeah, I think that helps for sure. All right. Well, seeing no further questions in the Q&A, I do have one more question to kind of wrap us up, maybe. I'd just love to know what advice you might have for other cities or other counties that are interested in developing these kinds of approaches. What can really be done at the local level, and especially in the current environment? I mean, I talked about some of the funding headwinds, and you guys touched on some of the political difficulties, but yeah, any advice you would offer?
Be patient and persistent, like this Empower Coalition that's been really amazing to be a part of. Like that, the initial award was a technical assistant grant from ACEEE that Katie mentioned. Those are unfunded. They're technical assistance and awesome assistance, but um, I think diversification of funding is super important in these times, and having private partners and recruiting community members, and the more private partners you can have to the table to help the neighbors when these times are tough and there's less stimulus money and less federal funds. It's really key to keeping your programs going and proving success and increasing numbers while you're able, and then being hopeful that this funding will be coming back.
Yes, very much so. Anything you'd want to add to that, Katie?
Yeah, no, I want to reiterate that being patient, and I mean, if something's not working, you don't have to keep doing it. You can adjust programs, or your approach to them. We had two, and it seems like almost two and a half different pilots for the Alachua County Energy Efficiency Program. And I mean, I think the one that we ended up on is really great. But if we stuck with the first pilot, I don't feel like we would have had the same success that we've had. Um, and I mean, it has, yeah. And wait, there's one more thing. I don't remember. Oh, well.
That's all right. Well, thank you all so much again. I really appreciate it. This has been great, and we were so excited to feature your work in the report, and we're really grateful to all the program leaders and jurisdictions we were able to take the valuable time of to learn about their partnerships. So again, the links to the reports are in the chat. I hope folks will check them out. Also check out the Community Weatherization Coalition's work. Really awesome. And thank you all again. All
Thanks
right.
for having us.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye.